Get some!
Welcome to TYT. I'm your host, Anna Kasparian, joined by the wonderful, the lovely, the funny Wosny Lambre. How you doing, Woz?
I'm doing fantastic. Super excited to be on with you guys today.
So we've got Woz for the entirety of the show. I'm very excited about that. In the bonus episode for our members, I'm gonna jump because I'm going to debate someone on Chris Cuomo's show tonight about what's currently transpiring in the Gaza Strip. That should be fiery, but we are gonna have a bonus episode for our members. It'll be hosted by Brett Ehrlich and Wosny Lambre. And believe me, you wanna stick around for it because Jordan Peterson put out a music video. And I'm sure you guys have a lot to say about it. Some expert reviews on that, artistic genius that was shared with the world. All right, but in the first hour, of course, we've got a lot of serious news to get to. Two different Democratic senators have come forward to call for a ceasefire in Gaza, and neither one of them are named Bernie Sanders. We're gonna get to that in a little bit. We're also going to give you some other updates of what's transpiring in Gaza, and hopefully we'll also get to the latest version of Trump University in the first hour. But you guys are definitely gonna love all the news that we have prepared for you, all the hard work that our producers put into the show today. So thank you for the support, and as always, you can thank us for the work we do by sharing the stream. That's a free way to do it. You can become a member by going to tyt.com/join. You can send us super chats during the live show, which we'll read during our breaks. Thank you for your support. Thank you for all the love, and let's get to it. Let's get to our first story.
They then go on to talk about how they've been urging Gazans to flee northern Gaza and head south. That's similar to what we heard yesterday in their statement. They don't really acknowledge the civilian casualties here, but reiterate their position and their call for civilians to head south. So this is the second strike on the Jabalia refugee camp in less than 24 hours.
Israel has now officially confirmed that the Israeli Defense Forces have bombed the Jabalia refugee camp in northern Gaza for the second time. So I just want to back up for a second and remind you all that after they bombed that refugee camp, I should say refugee camp the first time, killing at least 50 civilians, they got a lot of backlash for it. But when you have the country with the most powerful military to back you up in everything and anything you want to do, you're not really gonna care about that international backlash. You're not gonna care about what the UN has to say about the high civilian death toll. You're gonna go ahead and bomb it the second time. Israeli airstrikes also hit the vicinity of the Al-Quds hospital in Gaza City, where doctors say up to 14,000 displaced people are sheltering, according to the director of the hospital. The strikes that began Wednesday evening continued into Thursday morning, and we're getting closer to the hospital, according to Dr. Bashir Murad. The civil defense in Hamas-run Gaza described the strike as a second massacre. The airstrike killed at least 80 people and injured hundreds more, according to a doctor, Dr. Atef Al-Kulut, the director of Gaza's Indonesian hospital. He told CNN more bodies were being dug out of the rubble, and the majority of casualties were women and children. In fact, if you look at the numbers, if you look at the names of the individuals who have died as a result of these airstrikes and the bombardment by the IDF in Gaza, you'll notice that somewhere between 65 to 70% of the civilians killed are women, children, and elderly people. So I don't know, I mean, that's a lot of civilian death. About 9,000 civilians have died already. The number is actually likely higher than that. And I don't know, Woz, do you think that Israelis are finally feeling safe? Are there enough deaths in the Gaza Strip to make them feel safe? Enough refugee camps bombed? Enough hospitals bombed? I don't know, tell me.
It's hard to talk about because this isn't, again, they're not gonna get some military victory out of this. Essentially what they're doing right now is collecting scalps, they put a certain amount of dead bodies on us. We're gonna inflict this, more dead bodies on them. That's what seems to be the animating logic, because again, they don't have intel on Hamas or their whereabouts. If they did, the attack would have never been able to be planned and executed in the way that it was in the first place. Like, the reason why Hamas was able to do this because they forgot about these guys. They forgot about the crisis that was happening in Gaza. And so these guys were able to do this. So this idea that these attacks are aimed at quote unquote destroying Hamas is absurd. There's nothing targeted about this. They have no information or intel. They're just bombing stuff indiscriminately. That's just obviously what's happening. They're committing war crimes. These are atrocities. Of course, it's being compounded by the lack of, humanitarian aid that's being allowed to be sent into Gaza. And so, yeah, I would hope that people in Israel feel safer, feel like they're being made safer by this. At least that could be something that was justifying this stuff. But I mean, if you think about this in even kind of logical way, you can't think the outcome of this is going to be that the people of Gaza are gonna become less radicalized. That they're gonna become more.
That is a great point. And look, docile. Listen, I want to be very clear that this is not, Palestinians are in no way distinct from other human beings. Okay, so I'm gonna put it in my context. So people understand what I'm saying. If any government entity, if any military killed every member of my family, what do I have to live for at that point? I don't care if I live or die, but I know I'm angry and I know I want revenge. And so what the IDF is currently doing in Gaza is basically manufacturing more extremism. I mean, they're getting their retaliation, they want their pound of flesh. They're getting that pound of flesh, but if they think that this is somehow going to root out extremism, they would be mistaken, especially when you consider the leadership of Hamas is not in the Gaza Strip. The leadership of Hamas is in Qatar. So rather than, hey, making a deal with Qatar to get those disgusting Hamas terrorists out of there and bring them to justice, they're just carrying out retaliation against ordinary people. And I gotta say one other thing, okay? There have been some people who have responded to my reporting on this story to say that Palestinian civilians and Hamas militants are one of the same. They're the same. Okay, yeah. The people who believe that are barbaric and they carry out barbaric actions. And I have absolutely no interest in hearing anything they have to say. That kind of justification of the brutality and the murders that are currently taking place. I mean, really, let's talk about little children who should be in school, little children who don't even understand what this war is about. Those little children are the same as Hamas terrorist militants? No, I mean, like, the effort, the very aggressive effort to dehumanize these people is so disgusting and so difficult in regard to like avoiding being blackpilled by all of this, really. Like, you see a side of humanity that is so cruel and so vicious. I try to put it out of my mind and pretend like it doesn't exist. It exists, and it's the same feeling I got, Woz, when I saw some of the justifications toward what Hamas did to innocent Israeli civilians. What the hell is wrong with people? I don't understand. I don't understand any of it. I don't. And it gets worse. Every day it gets worse. Look, an hour or so before we came on air, CNN was reporting that in the north of the Gaza Strip, the IDF had actually intensified their airstrikes. Intensified them. Now keep in mind, a lot of Palestinians can't just evacuate and flee. Where are they gonna go? And you want them to go to the south? They're bombing the south too. There is no part of the Gaza Strip where civilians are safe. And then they turn around, they point to, oh, look, polls show that 80% of Palestinian civilians favor Hamas, while acknowledging that Hamas is a terrorist group. So let me understand something. If you are living under terrorist rule, and you know that these individuals have no problem murdering you if you say or do anything they disagree with, are you really gonna respond to that poll by saying that, no, I do not favor Hamas? By the way, I'm wondering what happened to the 20% of people who had the courage to say that they were against Hamas in that poll. No, it's just any excuse to dehumanize, any excuse to justify what very clearly, what very obviously is happening in the Gaza Strip. It is ethnic cleansing. There is documentation proving it. Okay, the IDF, the Israeli government, I should say, confirmed documents showing that one of their plans, one of their strategies was to essentially push the remaining Palestinian civilians, likely millions of people. I mean, who knows when the air raids are gonna be done? Who knows how many people will be left? But after that's over, they were planning on pushing them into Egypt. Get them out of the land, get them out. Just completely displacing millions of people. And we're supposed to sit back and say, that's totally fine, we co-sign. In fact, here's our hard-earned taxpayer money to fund it. Here are weapons to carry out this brutality. I just don't understand how anyone can justify what is happening right now. You have to have a certain level of just reckless disregard for human life to look at what's happening in the Gaza Strip right now, look at the number of literal children dying and say, no, this is totally fine. This is totally fine. I mean, it's definitely not gonna lead to peace. It's definitely gonna lead to more extremism. In the long run, it's not gonna keep Israeli civilians safe. But we really wanted retaliation. So we're gonna justify this and we're gonna watch all these babies get killed because it makes us feel good. Sorry, I know that was a bit of a rant. I blacked out a little bit. I can't, I mean, day after day, the barbarism, the brutality, the deaths. Like, I'm supposed to come here and be hushed tones. Like, let me speak as if I'm on NPR, as if this isn't the most unjust military action I've witnessed in my lifetime. 9,000 people gone. Mohammed al-Aswad, who's a Palestinian, told CNN the following. This is after the second bombing of the refugee camp. Children were carrying other injured children and running. With gray dust filling the air, bodies were hanging on the rubble, many of them unrecognizable. Some were bleeding and others were burnt. There's all sorts of pro-Israel conspiracy theories floating around on Twitter. I'm sure some of you have noticed them, alleging that Palestinians are faking their deaths. What is it? You don't want to accept what you're co-signing onto? You don't want to accept the fact that you're totally fine with these deaths, so you're gonna pretend like these deaths are faked? No, they're real. They're definitely real. And you enjoy it, so just tell the world who you really are. Why are you trying to hide it? Why are you trying to conceal it? What I'm not okay with is that as an American, because of our government and how they will greenlight anything Israel wants to do, these people are dying in our name, with our money, with our weapons. And I'm supposed to sit here and be okay with it. Wow, save me, jump in.
I mean, I think just for context, for people at home to get an understanding, in the first week of the aerial bombardment, I think Israel dropped about 6,000 tonnage of bombs on the Gaza Strip. Just for context, folks, not one single year of the American war in Afghanistan did we do that, right? So in 1 week, they dropped more bombs on Gaza than in any single year the US military did on Afghanistan, which, ostensibly, allegedly was in response to 9/11. You've heard the rhetoric that this is Israel's 9/11. Just for context of the brutality here. And another point I would like for people to understand is this concept that Israel has to quote unquote defend itself. Essentially, this is a retaliatory act, and so it's justified. And what I would say to that is that if you talk to any single member of Hamas, I would venture a guess, I wouldn't know. But if you talk to any Palestinian about what Hamas did on October 7th, they would say that's in retaliation to the occupation. That's in retaliation to the suffering, the hunger, the brutality of the occupation. And they would say that it was justified because of that.
Like and this idea that it wasn't. Sorry.
And it wasn't. And that's the point. So this idea that if you're when you're in retaliation of something, you can be indiscriminate in the people who you harm and kill and maim, be they babies, elderly people, women, you name it. That doesn't make any sense. And another thing, again, that folks should take into consideration, because again, I think the reason why we got this propaganda about Hamas beheading newborn babies on the internet and stuff like that, it's so that this behavior could be justified, right? I just want people to understand that these people who are being harmed right now, they don't have a voice, right? This idea that they should have voted Hamas out. There was a democratic election that was held in 2006. And Hamas stopped letting them conduct elections. Like they're not like this isn't some situation where they nominated these guys. There was a party platform that Hamas had, and they said, "Yo, we're gonna go out and indiscriminately kill a bunch of civilians and vote for us and we'll go out and implement that." That's not what happened here. And another thing is that it's not as if, again, how does an organization like Hamas even gain prominence? They were propped up by the Israeli government years ago, because back in those days, the Israelis wanted to undermine a way less militant, way less jihadist organization. They propped these dudes up, and now it came back to bite them. And most importantly, like what I would want everybody to understand, most importantly, Palestinian people have tried in the past, different organizations, to go about gaining their freedom by peaceful means. Protests, reaching out to other people in the world, other countries, human rights people, all of that stuff.
The UN? Mm-hmm.
The UN reached out to all of these people. These protesters, a lot of them got killed, a lot of them got jailed, they got crushed. So it's not like the behaviors of peace have ever been rewarded. They've never been incentivized. When they went about other means of trying to, strike a blow against the occupation, against the oppression, they got utterly crushed. And so we're talking about some of the most desperate people on planet Earth. Some crazies arise out of that, and they do something completely heinous. And the idea is like, all right, this is what we're gonna do. This will make people happy. I don't understand the logic here.
I'm about to show you the kinds of regurgitated talking points that are doled out on corporate news day in and day out, meant to justify the brutality that we're seeing in Gaza. 9,000 people dead. I want you to think about how many people that is, with no end in sight. Tomorrow we'll come on the show and we'll tell you the number is now 10,000. And the next week, after the weekend, we'll come back and who knows, maybe it'll be 15,000. How much does the Israeli government want? How many people need to die for Netanyahu to feel good about himself? I'm very curious about that, because this is more than just a pound of flesh at this point. So Aaron Burnett has an IDF spokesperson. You may have seen him before. We've definitely showed some of his videos on the show. Asks him about the high civilian death toll. And you're about to hear the same boring nonsense talking points regurgitated to you once again. Let's go.
You should have evacuated, you and your family, you shouldn't have been there. That doesn't mean that we wanted to kill anybody. It just means that when we warned Palestinians 2 weeks ago to evacuate that specific area because there was going to be major combat operations, they should have heeded the warning and they should have left.
They should have left where exactly? They should have left to the south, where you guys are also doing bombardments and airstrikes? Is that where you want them to go? The IDF confirmed to the media that they're doing airstrikes in the south. So this ridiculous notion, by the way, even like logistically speaking, displacing 1 million people from half of the strip is just, it's untenable. They can't do it. And the IDF knows that it's untenable. They know. You think they're stupid? They know. Now, Aaron Burnett pushed back a little bit. Let's watch how that went down.
The point, though, about wanting them to leave, I mean, these are 100,000 people in a refugee camp. By definition, they lack resources. Where were people like that supposed to go? Was it even reasonable to tell them to go? I mean, they don't have anything to begin with.
No, that is unfortunately not accurate at all. And if you let me, I'd like to explain why. If you look at the footage that you're showing, you don't see tents. This isn't some makeshift refugee camp. These are permanent dwellings of Palestinians living in a Palestinian-controlled area under Palestinian rule. These aren't refugees no more than my grandparents are refugees who came from Poland and Morocco in 1948. This is the time scope that we're talking about. These aren't refugees, and it's not a refugee camp any more than half of the population in modern Israel are refugees of the expulsion from Arab countries in 1948.
While I understand the point you're making about the permanency of the residents, they are poor.
And their
they
ability
can't leave.
To move, Erin. Yes, they could. They made a decision.
You can't even get foreigners who have been trapped in Gaza to get out of Gaza. Okay, they're finally allowing some of the foreigners to slow and steady trickle to leave through the border with Egypt. Where are they gonna go? Where are they gonna go? Woz, they're not refugees because they're not living in tents, they're living in buildings. So you see what he's doing there? You see what he's doing there? It was okay. Don't feel bad for them. Don't feel, they're not living in tents. I mean, we're about to level their whole neighborhood, their whole refugee camp. We're gonna level it so they end up, if they can survive it, living on the streets, whatever's left of that area. But it's not like they're living in tents now. So we're gonna destroy the buildings and kill the innocent civilians and pretend like we're conquering Hamas.
So just the idea that they're not refugees because they live there permanently it ignores the fact of the occupation. Israel controls everything that comes in and out of that place. When they say it's under Palestinian control, that's a superficial distinction. The Gaza Strip is controlled by Israel. They control the ports, they control everything. Folks cannot freely come and go in Gaza, but for a very select few amount of people. They're stuck there. They're stateless. They don't enjoy the same freedoms. They don't enjoy the same rights as their neighbors in Israel. They're refugees. They're stateless people in the way that they live. And again, for everybody at home to understand, they cannot beat Hamas. What do I mean by that? They're not fighting a conventional military foe. They're not gonna, invade Gaza and there's gonna be some, front that they're trying to conquer. They're not gonna take over villages, village by village, and just push this army back. This is a guerrilla group. They can't beat these guys. Again, recent examples, Vietnam, when the Russians invaded Afghanistan, when we invaded Afghanistan, the nonsense that happened in Iraq, like just look at what's happening in Libya right now. These wars cannot be actually won militarily. The only way for the army to win this war would literally be to exterminate 2 million people.
Well, they're working on it.
That's it.
They're working on it.
That's it.
And by the way,
there's no military solution here, guys. So they can't win.
There are the airstrikes, which obviously are taking out a lot of people. And then look, people get real uncomfortable when I use words like ethnic cleansing and genocide. But how else are you going to describe a situation in which people are trapped in a tiny strip of land, millions of people? You're doing these air raids and this bombardment. The death toll is already 9,000 people. And then on top of that, the blockade of humanitarian aid, the blockade of fuel. Why don't we talk about that just briefly, Because we've been warning that not allowing fuel into the Gaza Strip is going to be incredibly destructive for the civilians there, because the hospitals can no longer function and operate. And look, wouldn't you know, that's exactly what we're seeing now. Nearly half of all hospitals in Gaza are out of service due to bombardments and fuel shortages, including the leading cancer hospital in the Strip, according to the Palestinian Ministry of Health in Ramallah. It warned Gaza's largest hospital, Al-Shifa, would be forced to stop operating in less than a day. Meanwhile, the main generator for the Gaza Indonesian hospital, one of the few remaining hospitals serving the northern part of the coastal enclave, went out of service Wednesday night, according to Dr. Atef Al-Khalut. He's the head of that hospital. So you're bombing the hospitals in some cases. You're refusing to allow fuel so the hospitals can function appropriately. There's still significant restrictions on humanitarian aid, meaning many of these Palestinian civilians have no access to food or clean drinking water. Pregnant women are seen drinking brackish water. The aerial bombardments keep happening over and over again, day after day, with absolutely no concern for human lives, innocent human lives, civilian human lives. And then they'll throw out the ridiculous, nonsensical talking point of Hamas uses them as human shields. Well, you guys are the ones who pulled the trigger. You're the ones who pulled the trigger. So I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say. If I had the option, if I would not do the airstrike, knowing that at least 50 civilians, many of whom are children, are gonna die so I can take out allegedly one Hamas commander. I wouldn't do it because I'm smart enough to know that those innocent civilians don't deserve to lose their lives. And I'm also smart enough to know that doing that leads to more extremism and more hostility toward Israel and Israeli civilians. Doesn't take a genius to figure that out. All you have to do is look at recent history. Back in 2002, the George W. Bush administration condemned the Israeli government for doing an airstrike in Gaza that took out one Hamas militant but killed 14 other civilians. Think about how disgusting and devolved our country has gotten, our government has gotten, where Joe Biden can't outdo the war criminal George W. Bush, where George W. Bush has more morality and more of a conscience than Joe Biden. Joe Biden is a disgrace, an absolute disgrace. I will not be voting for Joe Biden under any circumstance. I don't care about any other policy that he has championed and had a little bit of success on. I cannot, as an Armenian American, support a president who has greenlit the ethnic cleansing and genocide of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. I will not be voting for Joe Biden. It goes against my morality and everything I stand for. This, for me, is the red line. We gotta take a break. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the show. Anna Kasparian and Wosny Lambre with you. We've got some updates on calls for a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip. Let's get to it.
Overnight, for the first time, President Biden calling for a humanitarian pause in the Israel-Hamas war.
Mr. President.
After being interrupted by a protester demanding a ceasefire, the president responding, quote, "I think we need a pause."
In the face of increasing pressure, President Joe Biden refuses to call for a ceasefire. Instead, he engages in this nonsense BS effort to call for a humanitarian pause without really describing what that means. What is a humanitarian pause? Humanitarian pause meaning, hey, maybe we can get Israel to stop the bombardment, the aerial bombardment and the airstrikes that are killing literally thousands of civilians in the Gaza Strip, maybe for half a day, maybe for a day. Maybe we can get some humanitarian aid in, and then after that, Israel can continue. Is that what the humanitarian pause is? What is that? He stopped short of calling for a ceasefire because he doesn't believe in a ceasefire. Because this American government, a country that is supposed to be a superpower, is actually not able to make a moral, conscious decision about what Israel is doing right now. We just have to support everything that the right-wing Israeli government wants to do, even if it means that thousands of civilian lives will be lost. So, since then, by the way, 2 Democratic senators have called for a ceasefire. We're gonna get to those details in just a moment. Neither one of them are named Bernie Sanders, which is so incredibly depressing. But let's get back to Biden, then we'll get to the senators who are calling for a ceasefire. So he was giving a speech at a campaign fundraiser in Minnesota when a person who identified herself as Rabbi Jessica Rosenberg, she's with the Jewish Voices for Peace, interrupted his speech, and this is what she said to him.
Mr. President, if you care about Jewish people as a rabbi, I need you to call for a ceasefire right now.
Calling for a ceasefire, you can hear people in the audience telling her to get out, leave. Imagine being offended for calls for a ceasefire. Like, hey, we'd like the bloodshed to stop. Can we move toward a peaceful resolution here? Get out, get out. Man, these blood-hungry Americans in that room specifically. He responded to her by basically saying that he wants a humanitarian pause. Am I being too vicious here? Do you think a humanitarian pause makes sense in lieu of a ceasefire?
I think it makes sense for the PR campaign that they're trying with this. I think they're trying everything that they can do as far as public perception without actually doing the right thing. But I don't think it can last long. I don't know if you saw the protests that happened in Grand Central Station in New York. Many Jewish Americans were at the forefront of that protest calling for a ceasefire. Obviously in London, there were huge demonstrations in places like Turkey. And again, here's the thing, Anna, that I feel a little bit more heartened by is that even the coverage of this specific attack on Gaza just has a different tint than anything we've ever seen in the past. Just the idea that opposition to this brutality would appear at all on places like CNN, MSNBC, the New York Times is very new. So Joe Biden can be as politically inept, show as much political cowardice as he wants, but the tides are changing. And I think most importantly, Anna, that I would like people to think about, not just be heartened by so much of the demonstrations that have been happening, just an outcrying of people demanding peace. When Blinken went to Qatar and he's talking to the leaders over there, you kind of got the sense that they were like, look, bro, y'all can try to do this, but if y'all wanna have partners in this part of the world that are receptive to the things that y'all care about, y'all need to stop, because our people will rebel against us. I know that it seems like the Saudis and the Qataris and the Emiratis are these entrenched regimes, right? That used to be the case for the Shah in Iran too. That was our boy over there. And because of US-backed policies and repression, the people over there rose up. They ain't been allowed in those parts ever since. And so I really do truly believe that people in the Arab world are gonna have to bring some pressure to bear on the United States. Even those ridiculously brutal regimes, even they're gonna have to step up and be like, guys, We can't do this. Our people will not have us if we do this.
There are mass protests in Turkey, Jordan, Lebanon, Egypt. The Arab world is on fire right now. Okay, this is, again, I've said it a billion times, I'm gonna say it again. We are barreling toward a giant regional war. And for everyone in that room who told that rabbi to sit down or get out, I really hope that they're enlisted in the military, because I think it would be wrong for the men and women in this country who do not co-sign to the brutality that is being carried out by the IDF as we speak. It would be unfair for them to go fight in those wars. So those who are egging the war on, I hope you got your war boots on. I hope you're enlisted. You better not be a chicken hawk, okay? They have no problem with the young men and women of this country fighting these disgusting wars that could have been prevented. Because hey, they're at a fundraiser in Minnesota. I'm gonna venture to say that these are moneyed interests. These are people living high off the hog. They don't have to worry about the consequences of that regional war. They get to sit in their cushy homes, they get to buy our politicians, and they get everything they want, as the rest of us suffer for the brutality that they egg on. That is what's happening in that room. That is who Biden is. The guy who looks at all that carnage in the Gaza Strip and provides cover for Netanyahu, a far-right Israeli politician who could not care less about human lives, including the human lives in his own goddamn country. Let's keep it real, okay? Couldn't be bothered to keep his own civilians safe, was too busy trying to take apart their democracy by disempowering their judiciary branch. Too busy with all of that to notice that there's a terrorist plot that he could have foiled if he was a little more focused. So hey, what a great way to stay in power. What a great way to get people's minds off of his dismantling of Israel's democracy. Just go ahead and bomb the crap out of the Gaza Strip. Who cares how many civilians die? It's disgusting, absolutely disgusting.
Well, and I just want to hit on something that you said earlier that I think is important, right? You said people have a problem with you calling this ethnic cleansing.
What else is it?
There's
tell
no
me how
other
it's
way
not.
to describe it.
Yeah, tell me how it's not.
Again, if you want to look up the Zionist project, right? It's the idea that there should be a Jewish state. Some people who are new to an understanding of this conflict might say to themselves, well, why couldn't they just have had a state of Israel or whatever they wanted to call the state, and just included the indigenous population?
Can't do that.
That would defeat the purpose of having an ethno-Jewish state. That's the entire point of the project. It has to be a Jewish-ran state. And so that's why these people are being excluded. It's because they're not Jewish. So the conflict in and of itself to begin with is the fact that they're not of that ethnicity. And so when you start doing more and more settlements in places like the West Bank to expand your state, and literally, because this is another thing, and I don't know that we have time to get into it. I think a lot of Americans, the way they get taught the concept of a settlement or a settler is these nice Puritans that came on the Mayflower and came to America, and they just built up their nice places and they put some churches in it and they made the Native Americans Christians. And it's the concept of a settler or a settlement is not pejorative. It has an innocuous ring to it to most Americans. But when they say people are settling the West Bank, what does that mean? The Israeli army comes, pushes a bunch of Palestinians out, kicks them out by brutal force, keeps the army there while they build it up. And that then expands the borders of the Israeli state. So they replace native Palestinians and put Israeli settlers to replace them. It's literally an ethnic cleansing. The reason why these folks are not being allowed to be part of the state of Israel is that they're not Jewish. Because that's the entire point of a Zionist project. And again, there are people who will say, well, it's justified. Every time we've been in other people's states, we've been displaced, we got genocided by the Germans. And there are people that'll make that argument. And I don't want to argue that point with people. What I would say is you can't deny that this is an ethnic cleansing. The entire Zionist project is an ethnic one.
Listen, I don't think that a one-state solution is feasible in any way, shape, or form. I think that what's currently happening takes this whole situation, this entire conflict, a billion steps backwards, not forward. And my issue is, if you want a two-state solution, which I do, I think that the 1967 border should be recognized and honored. The problem is, the borders weren't honored. I mean, even in recent years, how many stories did we did about the illegal settlements in the West Bank? There's no outrage about that, right? Here in the United States, no outrage about that. No outrage from Netanyahu. He loves the illegal settlements. He pursued the illegal settlements. So anyone who says, look, all we want is peace, okay? We want to honor the borders, and we want a two-state solution, you can't say that while simultaneously supporting someone like Benjamin Netanyahu, who had no issue with Israelis building illegal settlements in the West Bank, which is not governed by Hamas. It's governed by the Palestinian Authority. And it's important that you know that, because as you see footage of what's happening to Palestinians in the West Bank today as a result of this war, don't let anyone lie to you and tell you that it's because of Hamas. Because even though it's governed by the Palestinian Authority, those Palestinian civilians in the West Bank are seen as subhuman. They've been treated as such. So the idea that the violence is one-sided, it's been one-sided, is laughable to say the least. It has not been one-sided. You need two parties to agree to peace for peace to exist. And peace means that you have two free states, okay? Not a free state and an occupied state, two free sovereign states. That should be the goal. But currently what the United States is co-signing to is the opposite of that. Now I want to get to the two senators who finally saw what's happening and realize, okay, I guess enough is enough. The first who spoke out today was, believe it or not, Senator Dick Durbin. So I want to go to that video. Let's watch.
I think a lot of people listening to people in power, President, you, Secretary Blinken, calling for a humanitarian pause, are asking themselves, why is that different from a ceasefire? 2 years ago, 2021, during an escalation of violence between Israel and Gaza, you called for a ceasefire and you said you, quote, couldn't disagree more with Netanyahu's policies, quote, when it came to the treatment of Palestinians. Is a ceasefire needed now?
I think it is, at least in the context of both sides agreeing. For example, the release of those who have been kidnapped should be part of this, immediate release. That should be the beginning of it. An effort should be made to engage in conversation between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Let's face it, this has gone on for decades. Whatever the rationale from the beginning, it has now reached an intolerable level. We need to have a resolution in the Middle East that gives some promise for the future.
Dick Durbin, not a progressive Democrat, not a democratic socialist like Senator Bernie Sanders, who has failed to call for a ceasefire. Much like President Joe Biden, he wants a humanitarian pause. The cowardice demonstrated by Bernie Sanders is so utterly depressing. Now we have another Democratic senator who called for a ceasefire soon after Dick Durbin did. Senator Chris Murphy with a newsy statement on Israel. Quote, it's time for Israel's friends to recognize that the current operational approach is causing an unacceptable level of civilian harm and does not appear likely to achieve the goal of permanently ending the threat from Hamas. In a subsequent tweet, Andrew Desiderio writes that Murphy, who's been in close touch with White House and the state about the war in Israel, says Israel should immediately reconsider its approach and shift to a more deliberate and proportionate counterterrorism campaign, surgically targeting Hamas and Islamic Jihad leaders and terrorist infrastructure. And that seems to be an admission that the IDF hasn't been engaging in these surgical strikes, that they've been pretty belligerent in indiscriminately bombing the Gaza Strip, including the south of the Strip, where Palestinian civilians were told to evacuate to for safety. Any final words on this, Woz?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm just as dismayed as you are by Senator Sanders' refusal to get in the fight right now. It just seems like he never wants to completely go against Joe Biden.
True.
Whatever influence that he may have within the administration, it's predicated on him not coming out and publicly killing the guy ever. And so I think that's what we're seeing here. He's been kind of attached to Joe Biden at the hip. Some would say he's the administration's leftward flank. But you know, the strings that come with that is that he doesn't come out and just oppose him as he should right now in a situation that's as dire as anything that's faced the administration since Biden got elected. So I'm not surprised by that. But you know, again, shouts to Dick Durbin and Senator Murphy for coming out and calling for what's right, and that's an end to the bombings.
Absolutely. We got to take a break. When we come back, we'll give you an update on those efforts to censure Representative Rashida Tlaib over her comments on this war. The outcome of that effort might surprise you. Come right back. Welcome back to the show, everyone. Anna Kasparian and Wosny Lambre with you. Let's get right to our next story because we've been covering a lot of really negative stuff, but there's some positive news today as well. Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene is super salty about her failed attempt to censure a colleague in the House of Representatives, Democrat Rashida Tlaib. Apparently, they had a floor vote on her resolution to censure Tlaib, and it failed. And we'll get to that failure and how it failed in just a moment. Now, we got to back up for all of you who might have missed how this story first started, what triggered the efforts to censure Rashida Tlaib. Well, she happens to be the only Palestinian American in Congress, and she has received a lot of backlash from Republicans and even some Democratic lawmakers in regard to her reaction to the Hamas terrorist attacks on October 7th. You know, she of course condemned them, but she also brought attention to the plight of Palestinians. They didn't like that. She also has criticized Israeli airstrikes in Gaza. And to be quite frank, at this point in this war, I feel that anyone who fails to condemn the airstrikes in Gaza is either not informed about what's happening, has not seen any video footage of what's happening, or just doesn't care that 65 to 70% of the people who are being slaughtered there, who have been slaughtered already, happen to be women, children, and the elderly. And you know, some people are okay with that. I just think that they're barbaric. But let me continue. The resolution accused Tlaib of anti-Semitic activity and sympathizing with terrorist organizations. It also accused her of leading an insurrection at the US Capitol complex. Last month, Tlaib came under fire for displaying the Palestinian flag outside her office. While the flag had long been on display, I mean, she is a Palestinian American, critics argued that the flag should have been taken down following the October 7th Hamas terrorist attacks. Which, by the way, Hamas and Palestinians, not synonymous. In fact, Hamas has its own flag. She was not flying a Hamas flag, she's flying the Palestinian flag. But she should have taken that down, according to Republican lawmaker Max Miller, who introduced an amendment in an attempt to force Tlaib to take the flag down. He wanted to ban all flags from any other country from being hung in the congressional building. But Miller apparently has a problem with Marjorie Taylor Greene as well, as he should. At least he's being fair by calling out Marjorie Taylor Greene and her anti-Semitic statements, because her statements absolutely have been anti-Semitic. He said Marjorie Taylor Greene has said anti-Semitic remarks. Rashida Tlaib has said anti-Semitic remarks. I think that goes a little too far. Rashida Tlaib, I think, should have been more careful in what she said immediately after the Hamas terrorist attacks on October 7th. She should have been more sensitive in her initial response, but there was nothing in her response that I believe is anti-Semitic. You know what is anti-Semitic? Blaming California's wildfires on Jewish space lasers, which is what Marjorie Taylor Greene said. That's anti-Semitic. Now, House Democrats, meanwhile, suggested that the resolution against Tlaib is a racist attack. Representative Maxwell Alejandro Frost from Florida, a Democrat from Florida, says they want to censure her because she's brown. And Tlaib called the resolution deeply Islamophobic, and she put out a statement. I'm gonna read a few excerpts from it. Marjorie Taylor Greene's unhinged resolution is deeply Islamophobic and attacks peaceful Jewish anti-war advocates. I am proud to stand in solidarity with Jewish peace advocates calling for a ceasefire and an end to the violence. I will not be bullied, I will not be dehumanized, and I will not be silenced. I will continue to call for a ceasefire, for the immediate delivery of humanitarian aid, for the release of hostages and those arbitrarily detained, and for every American to be brought home. I will continue to work for a just and lasting peace that upholds the human rights and dignity of all people and ensures that no person, no child has to suffer or live in fear of violence. Yeah, that doesn't sound like something an anti-Semite would say. Now, in the end, the resolution failed, with most members of the House basically voting against it. That means a lot of Republicans voted against it as well. The motion to table the resolution carried after 222 members voted in favor, with 183 opposed. 23 Republicans, including Representative Thomas Massie, who's been shockingly good on this topic, joined with Democrats in killing the censure. And by the way, even Chip Roy wasn't feeling it. He was one of the Republicans who voted against it. Tonight's feckless resolution to censure Tlaib was deeply flawed and made legally and factually unverified claims, including the claim of leading an insurrection. Credit where credit is due. I commend the dozens of Republicans who joined Democrats in voting to table this resolution. Now, Marjorie Greene was very angry with Chip Roy. We'll get to that in just a moment, but I wanna pause and give you an opportunity to weigh in, Woz.
So there are actually a lot of echoes with 9/11 of the October 7th Hamas attack. One is just this immediate reactionary impulse to stamp out any dissent whatsoever. People, look, I was a young person at the time, and I definitely wasn't very politically engaged, but you can go back and read not just what the neocons were saying in major publications. Obviously, those are the most unhinged people on a foreign policy perspective, but even liberals were calling people treasonous, unpatriotic for voicing their opinion that maybe war is probably not the answer here, right? And I think Rashida Tlaib was seeing some of that. Of course, she didn't give out the perfect statement after the horrible atrocities that Hamas committed. But again, what I would argue is that her perspective is informed by the fact that this conflict did not begin on October 7th. It's not the beginning of the history of the situation over there. And I think her statement reflected that knowledge, that understanding that October 7th is not where this all started. Again, you gotta acknowledge when atrocities happen.
Absolutely.
But the response to that, to me, is just the same reactionary nonsense from 9/11, where people were literally being called traitors for not supporting an all-out war in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Yeah, no, it's funny that you mentioned 9/11. I've been thinking about that a lot because there are a lot of parallels. And what's hilarious to me is after the atrocities that were committed by Hamas on October 7th, there was story after story about how Biden is urging Netanyahu to avoid making the same mistakes that the United States made following 9/11. No, that didn't happen. In fact, the retaliation was even more intense. And I'm worried about how this is gonna destabilize that region, even more than it has been in the past. So, I'm happy that, look, I've been noticing, shockingly, some Republican lawmakers showing us that they have some level of humanity in response to everything that's going on right now in Gaza. Like Thomas Massie is one of the few people in Congress, the only Republican in the House of Representatives who voted against the $14.3 billion that they were trying to allocate for Israel. By the way, it did pass in the House because there was only like a handful of progressives, and Thomas Massie, a Republican, who's like, no, I do not support this. So I love that. I want to see more of that. I love that there were 25, Republicans who were just like, no, we've got a few members of our own who have like openly said disgusting anti-Semitic things, including the woman who brought forth this resolution. I'm glad they realized that. We need more of that in Congress, to be quite frank. Now, with that said, Marjorie Greene was not happy. So Chip Roy had tweeted about his decision, saying that Representative Rashida Tlaib has repeatedly made outrageous remarks toward Israel and the Jewish people. Her conduct is unbecoming of a member of Congress and certainly worthy of condemnation, if not censure, okay? But he voted against the censure. And so Marjorie Greene quote tweeted that and said, "You voted to kick me out of the Freedom Caucus, but keep CNN wannabe Ken Buck and groping Lauren Boebert, and you voted with the Democrats to protect terrorist Tlaib. You hate Trump, certified Biden's election, and could care less about January 6 defendants being persecuted." Guys, we need adults in the room, okay? Like, this woman's a joke. And they went back and forth over and over again about this. Chip Roy didn't respond to her directly. He told The Hill, tell her to go chase so-called Jewish space lasers if she wants to spend time on that sort of thing. Good for you, Chip Roy. And Marjorie Greene responded with, oh, shut up, Colonel Sanders. You're not even from Texas, more like DMV. This woman, listen, if I wanted Congress and our government to be run by high school mean girls, then I would have supported someone like Marjorie Greene. Let's please Georgia, I believe in you, please. I know you're not gonna elect a Democrat for her seat, that's fine. Just elect an adult, okay? We still don't have a government spending bill, or funding bill, I should say. The deadline is quickly approaching for that. We still don't have any solutions to deal with our housing crisis. We don't have any solutions to deal with our migrant crisis. We don't have any solutions to deal with the opioid overdose epidemic, which gets worse every single year. They love to bring those issues up when they're campaigning. But after they get reelected, what do? You're getting into a little catfight on Twitter with your fellow colleague? Get off Twitter and do your job. Be an adult, but Marjorie Greene can't do any of that. Instead, she spends her time fighting with other members of Congress, licking Donald Trump's boots, and trying to censure someone on the basis of anti-Semitism when she herself has said some of the most anti-Semitic comments I've ever heard from a sitting member of Congress. Embarrassing. We gotta take a break. When we come back, we'll tell you about Trump University 2.0. It's a thing. Is it real? Is it gonna come to fruition? We'll give you the details and more when we come back.
Thanks for listening to the full episode of The Young Turks. Support our work, listen ad-free, access members-only bonus content, and more by subscribing to Apple Podcasts at apple.co/TYT. I'm your host, Cenk Uygur, and I'll see you soon.